This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by Brown Insurance Group has been providing coverage to municipalities, companies, and individuals in the region for over 73 years. As a partner of the Keystone Insurers Group, we are able to offer an extensive line of insurance products and services, from commercial services including employee benefits and liability insurance, to personal services such as home, auto, watercraft, and motorcycle coverage. We are also committed to our community. We support many charities and events in the region. Our core values of care and integrity since the inception of Brown Insurance Group has made us one of Indiana's most respected and valued insurance agencies. To make an appointment with one of our experienced specialists, call our Highland Insurance office at 219-972-6060. Brown Insurance Group. Small town values, big time resources. Going beyond expectations to protect you and yours.
Hello, we're here with Charles Williams, who is the president of CW Consulting, which is a leadership consulting or educational consulting, Educational consulting. And he's also the principal at Plato Charter School in Chicago. So welcome to our show, and this is kind of your second time being on.
Yes, thank you for having me.
A little bit less noisy of environment this time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no one yelling and screaming they want a beer.
We
do have beer here. Yeah, that's cool. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, where you came from, where you were born, basically,
Sure.
and where you went to school, and a bit about your career.
Okay. I know I mentioned last time that I am from the region. I was born in Chicago, but moved out to Hammond at a very early age. Grew up in Hammond and went to school throughout in Hammond. Irving, Spohn, when Spohn was around. Spent a little bit of time at Gavitt and then finished off at Clark. And then from there, I was at Purdue for my undergrad, Cal College for my first master's, Purdue for my second master's. And right now I'm actually taking a few courses through Harvard. They have what now is called micro-credentials. So instead of going and getting a full degree or even a certificate, you could get micro-credentials. So you take a series of courses, compact it in, typically online, and you could get essentially certified for specific skill sets. So I'm taking those through Harvard with the focus in leadership and managing change, specifically in educational institutions.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so talk about a little bit about your career. How you came up. You started out obviously as a teacher.
Right. So in fact, I didn't want to be a teacher, and I always tell people this. As the leader of the building, tell us your story, and I always start off. I didn't want to be a teacher, and but I went to Purdue, and actually my undergrad was in communications. In fact, focusing in PR, and so I started off in Hammond doing PR. And it was doing PR and said, hey, can you teach this class in English, which happened to be my second major. And so it became more and more English, less and less PR. And so I went back to school and finished. That's when I got my first master's in teaching. Became a teacher, taught bilingual students, taught mainstream students, essentially everything from grades 4 through 12, mainstream bilingual students. So just kind of all over the board. I started with the bilingual program in Hammond, taught at Hammond High, moved over into Gary at a charter school, eventually became an assistant principal, and now I've been a principal for the last 6 years, 1 year in Gary, and then the last 5 years out in Chicago.
Oh, amazing. So now you're at the charter school, and you've actually, as an administrator, you've had to... and again, I've always tell people that education is probably one of the most difficult leadership roles to fill, because you have all these edicts being passed down, and some that you may not necessarily agree with, but you're being paid to make sure that they are passed on, and make sure that your teachers are following them, which is quite a difficult assignment, because they may not agree with what edicts that come down.
Absolutely.
So it creates a kind of interesting and unique management style you have to, because you not only have to publicly support those, but so why don't you tell us a bit about that, some of your models that you've used in as a principal,
Sure.
and to help the teachers and kind of kind of inspire them to come along with some of the things that you've had to do.
Okay. So I wouldn't know if it's specifically any particular models, but studying various leaders and roles and things like that, you take and pull, and you find out what works for you. So one of the things that I know that works for me is definitely building those relationships. Relationships are key. In education, everybody talks about Comer, and Comer says, no significant learning. So one of the things I talk about is that often talks about that relationship between teachers and students, right? Students won't learn if a relationship doesn't exist. And one of the things I often preach is that relationships need to exist throughout the building. It's critical even from an administrator to have relationships with their staff members, because once you understand your staff members and they know what you're there for, they're more willing, just like students, to work with you. Like you said, a lot of times we don't agree. Things come down that don't work for us, that don't match with what our students need. But when you tell teachers this, when you're transparent and you have those relationships, they're more apt to say, okay, we know that that's not what we want to do, but we know we need to do that as a whole, to make sure that we can move forward. So more than likely it's going to happen, instead of you just, kind of being that person on high, these things need to happen. And, they may do it, but reluctantly.
Right. I have to draw a parallel because I worked on the technology side in education, and my team had to go through the original iStep implementation, online iStep implementation, and we knew on the onset that this was not going to work well. But we knew as a team that we had no latitude to go to the superintendent. We're not going to do this because it's not going to. No, that would not have fared well. And so we had to sit and that's one of the things, is a chief thing that we had to talk about, is we had to be excellent communicators. We had to be able to communicate with each other, and then communicate as a team, and sit down and figure things out collectively. And that's one of the things that that I think that you find probably as well in as a principal to the teachers is the better that you do include them in that decision making. They know it's got to be done, but how do we go about doing it is the key factor. So why don't you talk a bit about that? Some of the strategies that you may use to carry out a difficult assignment in the classroom.
Sure. So one of the things that I've done in the consulting point, is I have what's called the principles, right? And so those are my philosophies on how I approach things. And so one of those is that you're not always the smartest person in the room, right? And I think a lot of times leaders feel like, I'm the leader, I have to be, the end all, know all. And if you think that way and you feel that way, you're going to fail, right? I often tell my staff, look, I am the leader, I'm the principal, and that's a title that I have. At the end of the day, the responsibility lands on me. But, I'm not the only person in this room. When we sit down and make decisions, everybody has their own viewpoints, their own aspects. In fact, oftentimes I tell them, hey, you're the ones on the front lines. I know what may work in theory, but I need you to let me know what's happening, because you're the one in the classroom actually applying these things. So whenever any type of decisions and those things need to be made, we all sit down. And so I have my own team. We have our dean, we have our counselors, our social worker, we bring our teachers in, and we sit down and we really brainstorm together. And I let them know that, I may have to make that final decision eventually, but I need their input. I need to know what is happening. Because if you make those decisions in isolation, you're ultimately going to fail.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you say the smartest person in the room, because one of the key elements in the team to work well is communication and inclusion. Well, one of the things I learned very on when I worked at Valpo, my smartest team member was the poorest communicator. Oh gosh, I hope he's not watching it. But he's actually amazing because I just saw him 6 months ago, and it's just like a difference between night and day, but he was the one that when we would sit through and look at challenges on the whiteboard and we draw it out on the whiteboard, he would get extremely upset because he couldn't communicate what he saw was wrong, but he knew the path that we were going down was definitely wrong.
Right.
So after we broke that down and got the team to be more accepting, and I worked with them and build up and taught them, okay, listen, you have to speak in complete sentences. You can't use these short phrases that no one understands. And after a while, he took a breath and then said, that is wrong because.
Sure.
And then things changed immensely. But everyone started respecting him more because he was the smartest on the team. He was brilliant, being able to see a problem and to analyze it and figure out what the solution should be. I still remember we were planning on loading all these test questions on the computers, and he kept on saying we should be doing a script, and everyone looked at him, what? And in his mind he knew exactly, and he said no, and actually what he was trying to say, to touch every computer was foolish. We could just develop a script to let it run and do everything, and he did. And we were about to touch every computer until we sat down. And so that is one of the things that I look back on that team, and it just was amazing. All the elements were there for a very successful team, and it's just a matter of getting them. And really, I viewed myself as a traffic cop in a lot of ways, is making sure that people, communicated and that we all agreed what we needed to do and just went out there and did it.
No, absolutely. I think sometimes you're right. Like, leaders think that they always have to do, and sometimes you're right. It's taking a step back and allowing your team to run. We just started a program called Accelerated Reader, and it's like, okay, we got to push this out. Well, we're K through 8, and it sounds great, right? And my daughters have done it, and I understand the power. But at the same time, my kindergarten and first grade teachers came to me and said, Mr. Williams, they don't know how to read yet. Like, that's literally what we're teaching.
Right.
So what is the impact of trying to have them do this program where they're reading books and taking tests when they're just learning how to read? And the question was, can we be excused from it for now until they start reading and then we start using it? And I could have said, no, everybody has to do it, but it made sense. So I had to take a step back and say, no, absolutely. And you take that stress off somebody's plate instead of like pushing through.
Yeah, I remember that. There was a strong debate about Accelerated Reader at Valpo. Some teachers absolutely loved it because, guess what? It inspired kids to read more because there were goals. If they read so many books, you got a free book or something of that nature. I think there was a whole mechanism set up where they would get these rewards. And some of the teachers are saying, hold on, they're not, we have to concentrate on reading skills before we let them run a race.
Right.
And they were correct. And we had all these kids building up all these scores, but were they good readers? I think the teachers were right. They were not necessarily all good readers, but they did know how to skim through books and answer the questions. Yeah. And so we're bringing in now.
So this is brand new. So something that we just started. So reading was one of our rough areas. Basically kids weren't reading. Period. Right. I mean, with all of the technology and things like that. Right. A lot of kids aren't reading to the point that they used to. And so we know that if we could get kids to start to read. In fact, there's a book that I remember having. It's called Read Aside. Right? And if we think about our little kids, right? Kindergarten, first, second, even sometimes third grade, I've never known a kid who said, I don't want to be read to. Right? They love reading. They love stories. They love that art of storytelling. But somewhere along the line, it gets taken away because reading becomes punitive. Right? So you're in trouble, sit down and read. Right, you have to read this book, and so there's a whole novel, or a book called Read Aside, and it talks about how we have systematically killed reading, trying to get kids to actually read, and so our goal this year is just to actually get kids interested just to read again, right? Find a book that you enjoy reading, read a book on your level that you're going to be successful with, and just start to build that love of reading again, and that's our biggest goal.
Yeah, this calls to mind one of my kids that went to Valpo schools. They had one teacher, fifth grade teachers. They all had all three of them, and he instilled the love of reading, and he made it inspirational. He made it very fun, and they would do these oh man, I remember my kids coming home and having to do these book reports, and that was his key to make sure they understood what they read.
Sure.
And but they found it fun. I mean, all of the books he used were they extremely. I mean, to this day, they still have them as collector items. And he was one of the phenomenal teachers in Valpo. He's one of those ones that were able to isolate his kids from all the trauma going around, the I-step and all that, and concentrate on reading. And that's something I want to ask you about. So we talked about all this things, the edicts and so on. And we talk about the reading, for instance, and that's one of the debates about standardized testing. We're spending so much time on teaching to the test. I mean, people try not to, but it is definitely a concern that they don't spend time making sure they do the right psychological things for the students, to make sure that they're learning, to make sure that all those that they're firing correctly, and that they're just not learning a response to the test, but they know how to get there. And it's like teaching someone to fish. So how do you handle that? Because with all these standardized testing, which you have to have, and how do you allow teachers the flexibility to do what's right for the students in the class?
Sure. So I'll admit that when I first started, I was one of those leaders, right? That we have to take this test, right? I would buy test prep materials. We got to focus on the test. We would do boot camps and all of these things, and what we realized is nothing worked. We would do all of that, and at the end, our kids were in the same exact place. It was late last year when I came across something, and it's really stuck true. And I share it with teachers, I share it with anybody I know. But in education, we have two terms, Maslow and Bloom, right? So Bloom's talks about, the verbiage, right? Getting to higher levels, being able to apply and synthesize and evaluate. But Maslow talks about, being able to take care of basic needs. He has his pyramid, and at the very bottom, it's, do you have food? Do you have shelter? Do you, and so there's this, statement, you have to Maslow before you can bloom. And so I've given my teachers permissions, right? And this year we've talked about it a lot, that, a lot of times people wait for permission. Right, and there's always, stop asking for permission, just go and do. So literally in the first week of school, I told my teachers, I give you these permissions, right? And some of it was to be innovative, to be creative, to have fun, to take risks. But the biggest one was to love, right? Love your students. And I think that really encompasses having those relationships. And once we started putting, that at the forefront, focusing on social emotional learning, right, trying to, getting curious, not furious, right, trying to figure out what's going on and making sure we could provide those things for our students, we've seen a drastic change. So, we haven't received our scores this year, but we were at a 2.8 and our goal was a 3.0. And if I've calculated everything correctly, we went all the way up to a 3.3. A huge jump in this last year, simply because we said, let's focus on what our students need, and everything else is going to kind of fall into place.
Right.
So once we stopped focusing on the test, once we stopped focusing on saying, we got to hit all of these standards and all of these skills, and really just started taking care of our students, everything else fell in, because you can't learn, you can't teach if those things aren't there.
Right. And this whole thing about accountability does not help. I mean, you have, and that's why when I ask, how do you develop that shell around,
right?
Because I know stepping outside of, the technical teams I've led, even before Valpo schools, we were tasked with designing a product or putting a mechanism together for assembly. And, we had all these external factors, shareholders saying, why isn't this product out? Why are we? But yet we couldn't rush the process, especially in the medical field, because that could go really bad. And so a lot of my time was spent in trying to get these guys to innovate in a very harsh environment. which was, with FDA and all the things that we had to go through, which was quite a task. But at the end of the day, we couldn't ignore what we had to do, and that is develop something that worked effectively and would be durable and not break constantly, but yet also try to be innovative so that we were a leader in the industry.
Absolutely.
And and so you look at all the skills that you have to do. And again, I still remember, again, I told you I had a mentor from 30 years ago. I still use him as a mentor today. And not one step did he ever take that he didn't come to someone and sit down in their office and, what do you think? Or we'd sit down in the conference room and he would say, okay, let's go around the table. What do you think about this? And also what I observed about him, which, he became transparent in the team, which meant he became one of us and, set an example like, okay, if I could do it, you guys can.
Right.
And, I found myself mimicking that in our department. And, there was an assignment they would say, oh man, there's no way we can get this done. Okay, what do we need to get done? Well, we need someone to do this. And I would step in and say, okay, I'll do that. You guys take care of the rest of it. And then I backed out if there was a decision to be made. And boy, it is just not easy.
No,
You're
absolutely right.
But, I enjoyed it because the key thing was you develop relationships. And you cannot, unless you're some skewed personality, you cannot not enjoy a relationship. And being able to develop I've got to say, with all of our team members I've had, I was always friends with them. In fact, it was kind of a guarded thing because you can't get too close, but we became good friends. We went out to eat, we enjoyed each other's company, and then the work day was the work day.
Right.
And we worked together very effectively. But that whole thing is trying to create that shell. And that's, even back 30 or 40 years ago, I still look back, gosh, I was creating a shell so that they can do the right thing and not feel the pressure, and now we come forward and the same thing is happening in education. And it's just kind of like being pelted with all these things that you have to do.
Absolutely.
And then I think it's more crucial for you guys because you really are developing our future and making sure those kids have skills to look at. And one of the things we talked about off the camera is, one of the things that I think is going to be challenged in the future is our environment. Getting kids to realize and be more environmentally aware.
Absolutely.
In fact, I hear more and more about that. A lot of what we're suffering now is because we as kids had blinders on. We heard about the environment, we heard about littering, but they really weren't sure what was happening. And but now there's more of a call to look at the environment and make sure kids are. So is there anything maybe happening at your school that you've heard about other schools?
Sure. So we do something, it's called PBL. And PBL can actually relate to many different things. And so one of the things that I do in my trainings with my teachers and other people is that PBL for me stands for problem, project, and place-based learning. So essentially we find a problem that exists within your community, right? And then students are tasked with designing some type of project or solution for that. So not only is it extremely creative, they really have to think outside the box, but they're taking everything that they've learned from all the other academic areas, putting it together and applying it. But it also makes them, it's making them conscious citizens, right? So for example, my school is on the far west side of Chicago, and we do have a large number of students who are homeless. So we have what we are doing, it's called a Genius Hour. So we've taken it from, some of the large corporations where they devote a portion of their time to launching and investigating something they're interested in. And so we literally have a class for that with our students. And so our students are now looking at, I have a student looking at the homelessness issues, on the west side for students, and developing solutions for that. So, I think depending on where you're at, giving students those tasks, and it really makes them become more aware of their surroundings, whether it's in an urban setting and dealing with, things like violence and poverty, or whether you're more in a suburban setting and saying, or even rural, saying, how do we tackle this issue that's impacting us? it's great all around. But what I see is that students really step up to the to the challenge, and they come up with some solutions that you just would never have thought about. When they present it, and you're like, huh. And so I've shared with them. They have a few more weeks left in their projects. We've invited the community in, and I think that's one of the big things is making it real, right? You can make it as, we're tackling this project, but when they know they're going to pitch it to people within the community, the alderman will be there, we have a state rep that will be there, and who knows where this is going to go. Maybe it's nothing, right? Or maybe at some point they see that's my solution being implemented, right, to some factor or the other. But you're right? We can't just focus on the textbooks. We can't just focus this as the classroom, right? Students have to really step out, and we see that. There's an entire movement right now for the environment, led by teenagers, because I think they're realizing we're about to adopt this world that we have to live in, and we should have a say-so in the things that are happening in it.
Right. And it's interesting you bring that up because again, it creates an awareness. I often hear throughout my career, the road to the solution is often way more important than the solution.
Right.
And because you develop an awareness and every step along the way, you begin developing a mental trigger that, wow, okay, yeah, that is an important piece or element into the ultimate solution. And you get to spend time on it. But I think that's great that they looked at homelessness, a very growing problem in the United States.
Absolutely. Good job, Kennedy.
yeah. And so, and you look at some of the other environmental factors, crime, violence, all that, being faced in a Chicago school that you have to look at. And it makes them more aware, depending where they come from in the Chicago area, that what are the solutions, what can be, and so they walk out there with that consciousness that there are solutions to these problems, right. And and already more of awareness of the problem. So that's great. So have there's been anything, and that is an environmental factor, but anything specifically having to do with the ecology, the environment, the how the impact on the environmental change and global warming or anything of that nature, things that they can do to kind of slow the process down?
So we haven't done a whole lot in that program. A lot of my teachers have incorporated that.
Oh, and by the way, this is a controversial subject. Oh, you know that. There's no global warming.
No, of course not. Of course not.
No. Half my friends are environmental scientists, and that's why I went to school with. Half my friends end up doing what I wanted to do and go into environmental science, and and I got talked into doing something else. So, but yeah, they all. And the problem that they have is they feel like they're not being heard. And there's a clear danger out there, and that's debatable left to right. Now, there's politics is finally involved, but one of the things that I think is important, and we were talking about the charter school in Chesterton and the dunes,
right,
and that is a complete immersion into the environment.
Absolutely.
And where kids see and are identifying different species and are able to see the different climate changes and what it's doing to those species of plant life, to animal life, and the impact. So, which is kind of what but in Chicago, the greatest concern is homelessness, and I guess being in the Chicago schools, that impacts them immediately.
Right.
That's their environment immediately. If you're in Chesterton, where they don't have as much violence, their immediate concern is the environment, because
Sure.
they live near the lake and it's impacting everyone's life there. So, but it is interesting to see what a role that education can play in all those factors.
Absolutely. A good friend of mine, Principal Anderson at Michelle Clark, right down the street. So one of the things that we talk about is food deserts, right? So, in Austin and in many of these urban areas, right, there is a very limited access to fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. And so, there are many corner stores, but those stores carry, the sodas and the chips and things like that. So, very limited access to those fresh ingredients. And so one of the things that they're actually doing at the school is learning about hydroponics and all of those things. And so they're literally growing, gardens, because one of the other things, right, in the urban landscapes is lack of farmable land.
Right.
So they're learning how to grow entire gardens using, hydroponics. And so, I had a tour of the area yesterday, and it's really cool. That students are, they have these fish that are, they're the feces from the fish serve as the nutrients for the plants, and there's no soil, right? It's all water. It's all light, and it creates this cycle. So to have students from an urban area literally growing these things, because as we talk about, if these things don't get checked, right, that's essentially what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to create these huge urban greenhouses where all of this is built, and so I think that they're looking at the future in those areas. But touching on that, right, to say if, what are some solutions that we may have, if things continue to go south for us.
Right, and that's been the plight of the, plight's the wrong word, but that has been the problem of the urban areas, is the lack of the stores, the bigger stores that come in and handle fresh produce.
Right.
So, like you said, they're left with these stores, corner stores that handle bare minimum, the milks, the very basic necessities, and that whole, and then there's transportation problems, so people can't go out of that area. They're left to fend that, so you end up with health issues related to their dietary needs
It's a
not
whole
being
cycle.
met. And yeah, it's a vicious cycle, and they haven't been able to effectively draw those stores in, which would help. So they have to look at more of a self-sustaining nature, gardens, community gardens,
Right.
and that thing.
In
So-
fact, one of the so in Austin we just did something called the Quality of Life Plan, and what they discovered is that there is a 20-year difference between residents in Austin and residents like in the Gold Coast. And you would think when you hear this, right? Oh, you're in different parts of the world, different parts of the country. These are different parts of the same city, but the access to those things, like you said, transportation, health, has had such a dramatic impact that there's a 20-year difference in the lifespan of somebody who lives, on the Gold Coast compared to, the west side of Chicago.
Right.
So we're trying to get our students to come up with solutions and figure out how do we address that, in our own neighborhoods.
Yeah, amazing. That's great work. That's great work. So wow, gosh, we've really covered a lot of bases tonight.
We have.
And maybe we'd have you back on again and
Absolutely.
talk about some of these things, because I think it's really important, that especially you as an educational leader, to talk about, and it's kind of from multiple facets. One is you're looking at an urban, and out here, even in Northwest Indiana, we are not as urban. Although you could debate that with Hammond and East Chicago and Whiting, but still, they still have access to some of the larger stores, the Walmarts, the Strax. Strax is infiltrating the whole area, and so I've got to say they have access to those, and even the private stores that are in the area are probably more stocked than what you would find in those corner stores in Chicago. So, but it is interesting, a different viewpoint from Northwest Indiana to Chicago.
Absolutely.
A difference in education, methodologies, and that's an interesting discussion in itself. So, gosh, anything else you want to share? Anything new that you can think about?
Yeah, so just an update since we last spoke. I think the last time we spoke, I was just launching this consulting firm. So the summer's been busy, multiple trainings. So very excited about that. And so right now I'm actually in the process of drafting my first novel. I don't want to call it a novel, but my first book. Just
cool.
reflecting, on some of those things. So hopefully that'll be out soon, and when we talk again, I can maybe have an update on that.
Oh yeah,
So-
that'd be great. Yeah, we love having authors on our show. It's
Yeah, I always share these insane stories that I've had, in education, and so people have often said you should really make a book out of those. And so that's just all I'm doing right now, is just putting all of those things down, my experiences and what that's led me to. Sometimes I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I think that I've accomplished a lot of things in a very short amount of time, and I definitely want to continue moving forward. And so I know there's other people out there who I think say, well, I'm not ready yet, right? Or I just need more experience, and so I want to be able to share that with them, to say, if you keep saying I'm not ready yet, or I need more experience, then you're never going to be ready. You're never, so just to push forward, and so to share those experiences, right? The great successes I've had, the horrible failures that I've gone through, and just put that out there, and maybe somebody will get something out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely, I mean, sometimes, the way I always look at sometimes is the failures are learning opportunities. Yeah, you look at them as failures, but the next time you go, you are that further along.
Absolutely.
And that's why I try to look at things. Keep us updated on that.
Of
We're going to
course.
have you
Of
back
course.
on when it's either closer or done, and maybe we'd have a book signing
Hey,
somewhere.
There we go.
That'd be great. Well, Charles, thanks so much for you coming on the show again and giving us an update and just having this free-form discussion about leadership, because it is kind of interesting to see how they are somewhat different and similar from the commercial environment to education, because we both have to guard our teams from all this hectic chaos going out there, and looking and trying to keep them focused on what needs to be done.
Absolutely.
But I admire your tact for doing that, and especially in inner city school, which there is an outer shell there that climate change is going to affect it. But is that the immediate concern for inner city school? Probably not. It's those issues you talked about are probably more important. So that was helpful, I think, at least. So. Well, thanks again, and appreciate it. And please keep us in touch with us, and we'll have you back on again.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Appreciate it. Goodbye for now.
This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by Brown Insurance Group has been providing coverage to municipalities, companies, and individuals in the region for over 73 years. As a partner of the Keystone Insurers Group, we are able to offer an extensive line of insurance products and services, from commercial services including employee benefits and liability insurance, to personal services such as home, auto, watercraft, and motorcycle coverage. We are also committed to our community. We support many charities and events in the region. Our core values of care and integrity since the inception of Brown Insurance Group has made us one of Indiana's most respected and valued insurance agencies. To make an appointment with one of our experienced specialists, call our Highland Insurance office at 219-972-6060. Brown Insurance Group. Small town values, big time resources, going beyond expectations to protect you and yours.